So, hi everyone. My name is David Baker. I am the Director of Data and Analytics for the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office. That is basically the greater Seattle area in the state of Washington. I'm kind of an unusual position or person because I started out as a prosecutor. I was a deputy prosecuting attorney. I did like about a decade's worth of just trying cases, prosecuting cases, doing most of the different jobs in different areas and groups within our office before I transitioned to running our case management system, basically managing PBK for our office. We are on Prosecutor by Carpel, and then doing all of our data and analytics work. And won't get into too much of it, but I have some background in that area as well. We went from paper directly to PBK in 2013, and that was quite a transition because, I guess our attorneys liked what they were used to, and they were used to paper. And so it took a lot to get them transferred over. And then over time, our use of PBK has improved, the quality of our data has improved, and we've gotten to a point where the data is kind of integral to our day-to-day management of our workload, and then our conversations with the King County Executive, the King County Council, the Judiciary about our budget, the funding, all the policy issues that are at stake in the area. And that goes a little bit back to what Jeff was saying. It's like having accurate data is key. You have to have granular data on each individual case, and you have to have good data on that. And if you do have that, then that can be zoomed out to give you those big picture funding, budget policy type questions, and answer those in a meaningful way. And I want to start out on that sort of more granular side of it, because we try and emphasize this data work at every level. And that starts with our lowest level of managers. So one of the things we've done is we've hooked up our data from PBK directly we've got a link, and I've designed queries and reports through Microsoft's Power BI. That's not the only system out there. There's lots of data analytics software out there. Tableau is another popular one. There are other companies that make sort of business intelligence or data analytics software, but we use Power BI. And one of the things we do is we set up a live feed in there that shows our managers exactly what the caseloads are for every attorney at that time. And that, if you think about it, is a really valuable tool for a manager. Let's say you are managing 10 attorneys. If you can look into a system in one place and say, these are what my 10 attorneys have, or this subgroup of the attorneys that you're managing, this is how many cases each of those attorneys have right now, that can tell you a lot about what their workload is right now, if you have cases to assign out, who to give them to, whether or not they're moving cases along, or they're just sort of stagnating there or not. Now, the numbers you see here are, very specific to King County, so they won't necessarily make sense for a lot of other jurisdictions. I mean, you'll see some people on here with 400 some cases and others with less than 20. Now, those reflect the sort of particularities of how the Superior Court felony criminal justice system functions in King County, and how we've organized our office. We organized our office in generally a horizontal manner, which means we have a group of attorneys that just reviews new cases that come in for filing decisions, and either files charges or declines to file charges. We have a group of attorneys who just negotiate cases. They tend to have larger caseloads and they're negotiating cases. And then we have attorneys who handle cases after those negotiations have ended and this case has started to move down that path towards trial. And so that results in very different caseloads and very different numbers. And for each section of our office, the managers have sort of learned the hard way, I guess, through watching this and looking at their caseloads regularly, sort of live day to day, what a reasonable caseload is. And we have seen that, for different units, trial attorneys who are in court vast amount of times, have a sort of maximum threshold where above a certain number of cases, they start to lose effectiveness and we get high rates of burnout. We started to lose people at those levels. I mean, and we sort of over time, over the years of sort of monitoring those caseloads, watching those, you can get a feel for your office and for the different groups in your office. What is a reasonable workload and what is a reasonable sort of period of time that someone can manage a higher than average workload? We try and be very careful about that. For instance, here you'll see this is a view of the domestic violence unit in Seattle. It's a small group. I think it's less than 10 attorneys if you see here. You see a lot of attorneys with 20 or so or less cases. Those attorneys down there are the trial attorneys. So in our office, that means that they are basically either preparing for trial or in trial at all times. They are not doing sort of general day-to-day speedy negotiations. It's not uncommon for them to be in back-to-back trials for months and months at a time. So they have a very sort of small number of cases, highly focused, highly intensive workload. And then at the top, you can see our sort of negotiating DPA for that unit of a much higher caseload. But seeing that, we can look at the individual attorneys, the details on what's going on for those specific cases. And then we can go back and look at the unit as a whole and sort of the adult system as a whole. So if we're going to look at the adult King County Superior Court caseload, you can then look, because we have that data on each case assigned to each attorney and to each unit, we can then zoom out and see that at the office-wide level, the big picture of how many cases does each unit, each sub part of our unit, of our office have pending, and what is their workload. Now, if you're tracking that, you can then sort of look at that over time and sort of understand, okay, what is an issue? What is a problem? And I'll give you one example of this in a moment, but this, for our slide purposes here, is just the open cases, but we also track cases that are received from law enforcement. How many cases are awaiting review for either filing or a decline? We're not going to file charges. And so we had a particular unit over the course of COVID. It was called the General Crimes Unit for a while. We're going through some reorg now, the name will change, but you can see this is how many cases they had under review. So this is assigned to individual cases in that individual attorneys in that unit. Those cases were assigned, they needed to be reviewed and a filing decision made, either file the case or decline the case. Decline is basically we're not filing charges at all. And you can see, starting with the COVID-19 sort of public health related restrictions on our court processing, their number of cases that they had pending to review went up dramatically. And we were able, because we were tracking this data and monitoring it on a regular basis and looking at this, we were able to see and identify that they had a substantial backlog of cases under review. And we were able to try and address that. Now, that backlog had a number of different causes. COVID-19 was part of that. We also had a lot of turnover in the office. There were issues staying fully staffed and training people up to take up new positions. And there was a substantial backlog of cases under review, but we were able to identify that in that specific area and redirect resources within our office and make policy decisions for our leadership within that office on what to emphasize. And they were able to work through and reduce that entire backlog, which was a pretty impressive accomplishment. They had sort of over 1,000 cases and they're basically to current, which means they can review cases within about 30 days of receipt or less. Now, all of those kind of decisions, so that decision to address that backlog and get us current was an important one. It was the right decision, but that also has consequences. So, and I use the consequences not necessarily in a negative sense, but it just is things will happen as a result. As a result of making filing decisions on all those cases, you can see I've added the purple line here. The total pending caseload in that unit went up dramatically. So,
5-minute warning.
Thank you. And that is another issue that they're going to have to address. So that unit now has substantially more cases pending with those attorneys who are negotiating and trying cases than they used to. And we have to sort of continue to monitor that and look at that. That is just sort of one example of one way we've sort of identified an issue and made management decisions to try and address those caseloads and sort of what happened as a result. That ability also lets you make funding and other policy arguments outside of your internal statements as well. So this is a visualization of the sort of open pending felony caseload and cases that we had to follow up on over the course of COVID-19. And this visual, a version of this visual became a huge point at the end of 2020 and into early 2021 as to what are we going to do for funding in the criminal justice system in King County, Washington? What do we need to do to address this backlog of cases? You can see that the overall sort of pending caseload in the court just about doubled over the course of COVID-19 and into 2021. Now, that was used and directly assisted in funding arguments with the county council, with the judiciary, with our executive as to how to fund various aspects of the criminal justice system and where to go from there. We've then continued to monitor that, and that visual and the continuation of it has been a continuing point of discussion amongst all the leadership within King County. Because as you can see, as we've gone on, the overall caseload has dropped somewhat, but those more serious cases and the overall caseload has stayed pretty stubbornly high. And along with that, we've seen the overall age of our caseload staying, increasing over time and staying relatively high. Now, all of these things are important to monitor, and we monitor them a lot more, but it's only possible because we have that granular data at each case level. And then that can be used to monitor each attorney, which monitors each unit, and then back to the entire office as a whole and what's going on as a big picture. So you have to I'd recommend at least considering, all levels of management when you're looking at this data, having the data that lets you look at each point and look at it over time. So, what is the difference between the open pending caseload a month ago versus today versus a year ago and so forth.